Beloved, as we come to this weekend, October 27th, believe it or not, we are 20 weeks from the original Pentecost Sunday of this year. It's hard to believe the year has gone by that fast, but ironically, in light of where we are, and in light of the lectionary reading, it's a Pentecostal reading. At least for us, it's a Pentecostal reading. It's Joel 2, verses 23 to 32. And I want to read it to you and just share a few insights with you based on where we are in terms of our emphasis on rebuilding the altars and redigging the wells and revival. O children of Zion, be glad and rejoice in the Lord your God, for he has given the early rain for your vindication. He has poured down for you abundant rain. The early and the later rain, as before, the threshing floors shall be full of grain. The vats will overflow with wine and oil. I will repay you for the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the hopper, the destroyer, and the cutter, my great army which I sent against you. You shall eat in plenty and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God, who has dealt wondrously with you. And my people shall never again be put to shame. You shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I, the Lord, am your God, and there is no other. And my people shall never again be put to shame. Then afterward I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions, even on the male and female slaves. In those days I will pour out my spirit. I will show portents in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. Then everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be those who escape, as the Lord has said, and among the survivors shall be those whom the Lord calls. Now, by the time we get to this portion of Joel, the earlier chapter has spoken of the devastation of a four-stage process of locusts that will literally, in judgment, become an army that God sends against his people to devastate their crops, to lead them to a place of drought, malnutrition, and illness. This is a mightily severe judgment of God on the people of God. And I suppose if we were to liken where we are today in the church, and when we see so many people have grown disillusioned with the church, and the culture wants nothing to do with the church, and there's all sorts of dynamics going on that are very similar to the way it was when the early church was first born, that we need to take a sobering look at what it means to rebuild the altar, because in the midst of all those devastations, we can say, well, there's been devastations in the culture in which we live. The locusts have eaten away at all the things that we thought were valuable. And Joel says that the priests in verse 17 of chapter 2 need to cry out between the porch and the altar. And then there comes this powerful promise that if they'll do that, rejoice and be glad, for the Lord is going to give you the early rain for your vindication, the latter rain, the abundant rain. You know, the Pentecostal movement, which has its roots in the Wesleyan revival, understood these passages in a contemporaneous way for them. They saw these words of Joel as being applicable to where they were at that time, at the turn of the 20th century. We need to see them where we are right now at the turn of the 21st century. We desperately need a fresh move of God. And in that, it says that God's going to not only send rain, just think about a drought ending and a time of flourishing, because the rain of God's Spirit begins to fall on fields that have been devastated by locusts, where all that which was good and beautiful at one time seems to have been taken away, and yet now Rain is coming from heaven to water those fields and to touch the soil and make it alive again to receive seed, so that grain and wine and the grapes and oil, olives, can flourish in the presence of God's smile through the rain. And not only the rain, but then the breath, the wind, the same breath that God breathed into the lump of clay that became Adam. That same breath, Joel says, God is going to pour out on all flesh. And old men and old women are going to dream dreams, and young men and young women are going to prophesy. And all stratas of society would be breathed upon by the breath and the wind of God. We need the water of the Spirit. We need the wind of the Spirit. We need the fire of the Spirit. And it talks about the moon being turned into blood. And it talks about the fire of God. By the time you get to the end, it's apocalyptic. We need all those aspects of the Holy Spirit. The Spirit as the water of life. The Spirit as the breath of life. The Spirit as the fire of God, the passion of God, the love of God, the all-consuming love of God. All of that happens in Joel because the priests cry out between the porch and the altar. We are the priesthood of all believers. We're also the prophethood of all believers. That altar time is really, really, really important. And yet we have to do it together. This has to be something we have to do as a family if we want to see revival in a culture that's been consumed by locusts. God has actually given the culture in many ways over to what it wants. And it doesn't seem to want God. And even within the church, there's become sort of a disinterest, a disillusionment. But it's not because there's something flawed in God. There's something in us that needs to see where we've moved from and what we need to move back towards, which is why it's time to rebuild the altars and redig the wells. You say, Bishop, what are we looking for? I'm looking for the water, the rain, to come and rain on our fields and bring back the flourishing of the grain, the word of the Lord, the wine, the joy of the Spirit, the oil, the mercy, the love, the power, the healing presence of Jesus in a fresh way. I'm looking for the breath of God. Breathe on me, breath of God. Fill me with life anew, that I might love what thou dost love and do what thou wouldst do. I need the breath of God to be like Jesus. I need the breath of God to become truly human. I need the breath of God to become all that God called me to be. You need the breath of God to be breathing into those areas where you've not taken a breath and seen the things you need to see in life because they've fallen asleep in a death of sorts because so much around you has decayed and eroded in the culture that it's kind of hard to see God in an anti-Christian culture. But we need to see him in a safe place. Where is the safe place? The gathering of the saints. Mount Zion is the safe place. Mount Zion is where survivors move from languishing to flourishing. That's what Joel is trying to tell us. I want us as a family to get there. I want us for the sake of our community to get there. I want a move of God for the sake of those that are languishing. And that includes many of you. I want a move of God for your sake. I want you to want a move of God for the sake of your loved ones. I want us to meet God at those altars in this next season and rebuilding the altar of the Lord or the altars of the Lord. These are basic things. Faith is an altar. The fire of God is an altar. The breath of God. What we want is the moving, the breathing, the passion of the Spirit to touch us where we live, to touch us where we hurt, to touch us where we yearn and desire, to touch us where we are. Sunday, we're going to continue in this theme of rebuilding the altar. I'm going to bring a very powerful, very simple message on faith. And by the way, in Joel, this safe place is a place where shame is totally removed from the consciousness of the people of God. May God grant us in this season to experience a reviving, because we've chosen as priests to cry out between the porch and the altar. Can we, beloved, come together in this season as a family and meet God where heaven kisses earth on Mount Zion? And for us, Mount Zion gathers at 555 Markham Woods Road. There's many Mount Zions in our city, and I'm concerned about all of the Mount Zions in our city where Christ is being proclaimed. But as your bishop and as your pastor, I'm especially concerned about the Mount Zion at 555 Markham Woods Road and all the families that identify with Church on the Living Edge. I'm asking us, in this season where we're declaring as we move to 2020 and a decade of challenge and change, can we meet God at the altar and pray for genuine revival, genuine movings and stirrings and outpourings of the blessed Holy Spirit? Bring someone who needs Jesus with you on Sunday. I don't want you to bring them to church. You are the church. Bring them with you to meet Jesus. And let's come to that altar and cry out for a fresh rain from heaven, a fresh breath from heaven, and a fresh fire from heaven. I look forward to seeing you Sunday. I love you.